Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I start by thanking the Backbench Committee for providing me with the opportunity to raise the Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict initiative, otherwise known as PSVI, and G7 on the floor of the House today. I promise that I will stop pestering them for at least a couple of days. I stand before the House as the chair of the all-party parliamentary group on PSVI, and I'm delighted to see some of the members of that APPG, and indeed the chair of the Development Committee and the member for Rotherham, who has been a stalwart supporter of this initiative, and her being here today is a reflection of the importance of the Development Committee being maintained, sustained and continuing to scrutinise our aid and development programmes around the world. I have been fortunate, Madam Deputy Speaker, having worked with the founding members of PSVI, the Baroness Hellich, Lord Hague and Chloe Dalton, and I have seen the evolution and success of that initiative over the last 9 years. So I feel that I am quite well placed to be able to debate why it is important and why it cannot be allowed to fail. Conflicts, both old and new, are often viewed by the loss of life on the battlefield, the death and casualty list, the land conquered, the treasuries plundered, the armies and arms deployed. But in reality, conflict is also about those on the sidelines, the innocent bystanders, the women, the children, those who bear the brunt of the conflict but receive little attention, recognition, support, or indeed justice. And it is my hope in the course of this debate that I can remind the House and the Government about the purposes and the objectives of PSVI and reignite our global leadership on this issue. Because now, more than ever, I believe that we not only have the moral duty to act, but an international landscape that is calling for action. After all, in a digitalised world, we are now greeted daily with recordings, news articles and accounts of systematic conflict-related sexual violence. Far from the issue diminishing, it is becoming more acute. And yet the objectives of PSVI have always been clear: to end the culture of impunity for perpetrators, to provide support for survivors, and to document crimes of sexual violence in conflict. These aims stood prominently at the initiative's inception, and today they hold true. In 2012, the collaboration between a Bosnian refugee, a Yorkshireman, and a Hollywood film star resulted not only in the UK government-led initiative, but a seismic collective collaboration from the international community to address this issue. Speaking in the Foreign Office, the then Foreign Secretary Lord Hague spoke of the need for a UK team of experts devoted to combating and preventing sexual violence in armed conflict. This short-noticed overseas deployment team was directed towards gathering evidence and testimony in the hope of supporting investigations and prosecutions. It used the expertise of doctors, lawyers, police, psychologists and forensic specialists. That team of experts were drawn down so as to be able to help protect victims, as well as supporting international organisations, leading training operations, developing laws and capabilities, all with a view to shattering that culture of impunity, ending rape as a weapon of war, bringing perpetrators to justice and raising awareness. And in those early years, up to 2015, the UK deployed its team of experts no less than 65 times to countries including Kosovo, Bosnia, Turkey, Mali and Kenya. These operations proved useful in gaining insight and experience and revealed the systematic use of rape and sexual violence in conflict areas across the world. These missions demonstrated not just that we were right to create such an initiative, but that there was a genuine need and requirement for action. So in 2014, the UK hosted the first ever global summit to end sexual violence in conflict, attracting 1,700 delegates from across the world, bringing together survivors, experts, governments, all with the aim of addressing rape as a weapon of war. And there are, I believe, plans for a further conference in due course, to which I hope the Minister might be able to explain and reveal. Under UK leadership, we also brought together 156 countries at the UN to denounce the use of rape as a weapon of war through the UN Declaration of Commitment to End Sexual Violence in Conflict. The early success of this initiative was readily apparent. The teams of experts were being deployed, the UK political leadership was ever present, the international community was full square behind the resolutions of the day and was supporting PSVI through their own domestic and international training programmes. The action was tangible, the results were measurable, and the optimism was infectious. Unfortunately, Madam Deputy Speaker, as is so often the case, a change of ministers and governments saw PSVI push down the agenda. The high funding levels of 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016 were steadily reduced. The PSVI team was amalgamated into different sections of the now FCDO, as opposed to remaining as a standalone body. The levels of deployment were scaled back. From 2016 to 2020, they were almost reduced by 50%, despite the number of conflicts and the documentation of sexual violence increasing over that period. Today, the international community is no more at peace than it was 9 years ago, so the need to fulfil our obligations to PSVI is essential. Yes.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. Clearly, we've had a change of administration in the United States recently. What assessment does he make of that change of administration? Does he see any greater willingness from, for example, the Biden administration to help his cause?
I thank the Honourable Member for Grantham and Stamford for that excellent intervention, because we now have a president who has previous form in addressing gender-based violence, preventing sexual violence in conflict. America resurging and talking about multilateralism should be the hook in which we can hang our coat on to ensure that initiatives like this are able to flourish over the coming years. As I was saying, in Ethiopia, there is widespread sexual violence ongoing against the people of Tigray. And I asked the Minister on Monday whether or not we would be deploying our PSVI team of experts to that area, and I hope he might be able to answer in his remarks. In Bangladesh, the Rohingyas are gathered in refugee camps detailing the appalling acts of sexual violence conducted against them in Myanmar. In Nigeria, the terrorist organisation of Boko Haram kidnaps girls and forces them into marriage, as well as subjecting them to acts of sexual violence. In Iraq, we're only just beginning to learn about the true extent of sexual violence committed by ISIS. The UN last year predicted that there would be 31 million more cases of sexual violence in conflict during the pandemic alone, and 2 million more cases of female genital mutilation. This is a crisis that has been ongoing and must be addressed. The list goes on, and yet the one common theme that is thread amongst all of these instances is that the perpetrators of these crimes will in all likelihood escape justice. Tackling rape in war, providing justice, supporting survivors are integral to peace negotiations, to conflict resolution, and to helping communities and countries recover and rebuild after conflicts. Madam Deputy Speaker, the success of the weekend past shows that the government can convene global leaders, reach international agreements and strike new trade deals, all of which I happen to consider to be part of global Britain's agenda. The pandemic, though, has reasserted the need for the international community to work together, not just in defeating COVID, but in addressing the major global challenges that humanity faces. From climate change to girls' education to tackling conflict-related sexual violence, the only resolution to these issues will arrive through international agreement and cooperation and designated leadership and action. Now, the UK has shown that leadership in previous years and can do so again. It was particularly welcome at the summit and in our own communiqué that we committed to consider how best to strengthen international architecture around conflict-related sexual violence. However, I might go further and ask if the government would consider to adopt the suggestion of the G7's own Gender Equality Advisory Council, which called for an international convention to eliminate the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war, with clear consequences for perpetrators and governments that fail to act. Given our own G7 communiqué calling for the strengthening of international architecture around conflict-related sexual violence, I have the following, I hope, helpful suggestions. First, a new international body should be created within the international community to collect and preserve evidence of conflict-related sexual violence and help bring perpetrators to justice. Providing support for survivors and delivering justice are necessities that cannot be overlooked. After all, it is not just the absence of conflict that denotes peace, but the presence of justice. Second, responsibility for PSVI must be restored to the Foreign Secretary. And at this point, I would like to apologise to Lord Ahmed because I'm trying to take a job away for him. But he has done a sterling job in promoting the Murad Code and Faith Leadership Declaration. But top-level leadership is needed on this issue. It must not be viewed as a supplementary matter, but an integral part of the government's agenda, and that is where it must be firmly placed. Third, PSVI must be run with a long-term funding cycle and strategy. The yo-yoing of budgets, as highlighted by the Independent Commission on Aid Impact, restricts the initiative's ability to address deep-rooted issues. Instead, we should seek to create a long-term 10-year plan that regularly reports to Parliament on the progress made and the strategy implemented. Fourth, the PSVI team should be institutionally ring-fenced within the SCDO. Such a team or unit should be able to stand the test of time and the changing of ministers. In ring-fencing PSVI, we can build real institutional knowledge that is to the benefit of us at home, but those abroad as well. Madam Deputy Speaker, the G7 has reminded us all that multilateralism is once again in the ascendancy. We should seize that opportunity, create new bodies, lead successful initiatives. And the Prime Minister has rightly and admirably focused on the promotion of girls' education. I wholeheartedly support him in that mission. But the success of one should not mean the failure in another. If we are to address education for girls, we will have to tackle gender-based violence. So I respectfully ask, as I reach my concluding remarks, for the Minister to consider the following points. Will he work with members across this House and the other place to help create a new international body? Will he help to ring-fence spending and create that long-term strategy for the PSVI team? Does he agree that PSVI must be led by a cabinet minister, preferably the Foreign Secretary? When will the PSVI team be deployed to Ethiopia, as mentioned by Lord Ahmed on the 24th of May? Does he agree that the UK government, does he agree with the G7 Gender Equality Advisory Council recommendations? And when will the PSVI Global Conference be held? I recognise that an election and a global pandemic has got in the way of it, but we are eagerly awaiting the opportunity to be able to hold a second conference and to reignite that leadership. Madam Deputy Speaker, in Christina Lamb's book, Our Bodies, Their Battlefields, which should be compulsory reading for any member that is interested on this subject, she details the different communities around the world that have been victims of sexual violence in conflict. And she makes many, many powerful points, but perhaps the most powerful to me are the words that rape is the cheapest weapon known to man. It has become a tool of government forces, militias, terrorists, criminals. It costs nothing to the perpetrator and everything to the victim. It is the weapon that brings incomprehensible harm and damage to victims. It destroys communities and societies, and it is more often than not responsible for sowing the seeds of future conflicts. As I said at the start of my remarks, I'm only highlighting the commitment that we made in 2012 and asking the government to step forward to reignite its global leadership on this issue. Failure to act now not only lets down our allies and flies in the face of what we have already achieved, but can also result in the blocking of other countries taking meaningful action. Now, if the UK does lack the willpower or the ambition or the vision to renew its efforts in this area, then we must be prepared to take steps to hand this initiative over to willing partners such as America, Canada, or Germany. For the sake of the government and for my own sake, I hope today that they will reassert their intentions to provide that global leadership, because the point of today's debate has been in the spirit to which we are being constructive and positive and reflecting on the very positive work that has been done to date. I look forward to hearing the words of other members who have far greater experience in this area than I do. But we have the opportunity, we have the international community waiting for us to take that step. And I thank the House for its time in hearing me.